Pokémon only, hosted by Sylph Company, and only comes along once a year. Each Pokémon trainer or otherwise who enters can only use one Pokémon the whole tournament, and it's a series of one-on-one ring matches that goes all the way up to the top. And the winner gets a golden belt certifying them as the P1 Grand Prix champion. Anthony revealed enthusiastically. Wow, where's it held? Misty asked. Well, usually it's held in Celadon City, Rebecca explained. But since that whole mess at the game lounge happened, they instead moved it this year to a small town not far from here. Actually, it's right on the way. And you two are doing this together? Giselle asked interestedly. Well, Rebecca began with a small smile. Not initially. It's always been a dream of Daddy's to train a Pokémon to win the P1 Grand Prix, and at first, I was really against it. He was never home and me, my siblings and mother really missed him. Anthony looked a little downcast at the reminder before Rebecca continued. But I eventually came to see that if it meant so much to Daddy, then after all he's done for us all these years, the least I could do was support him. And plus, we've had a lot of fun training Hitmonchan together. She finished with a raised finger and happy smile. That's really cool that you're doing it together, Misty complimented. It's like a father-daughter thing. Yep. Rebecca is me and Hitmonchan's support team, without her we'd be lost. That's why I call her the coach. Anthony said with a pat to his daughter's shoulder, who blushed in embarrassment and tried to divert the attention away from her. So what about all of you? Are you heading somewhere important? She asked curiously, to which each of them explained their individual goals and reasons for traveling together. They all talked for a short time after that, but soon enough, the father and daughter training duo had to get back to work drilling Hitmonchan for the fighting tournament. Once they said their respective goodbyes and took off running down the road again with Hitmonchan in between, Giselle smiled and spoke somewhat wistfully. It must be really fun to get to do something like that with your father. I wish me and my dad could be that close. She finished in more a whisper to herself than anyone else. Ash, for his part, looked thoughtful for a few moments before turning around and asking of his companions. Hey, how would you guys feel about a small detour? Small detour? Giselle asked. What do you mean? He nodded and smiled cryptically. Yeah, a small detour. Brock, check the map and see how far it is to the next town. The one Anthony and Rebecca said they're heading to. Looking confused but doing as asked regardless, Brock pulled out his map of Kanto from one of the pockets of the green vest he wore and checked it over for a few moments before replying to Ash's inquiry. About 3 days it looks like. But seriously Ash, why do you want to know? Pulling out his Pokédex from one of the lower pockets of his backpack, Ash opened it up and then grabbed one of the Pokeballs on his side, placing it on the teleporter pad of the device while speaking over his shoulder. Because. After the ball disappeared with a press of a button, Ash smiled to himself and then turned to look at his friends again. I intend to have Primip take part in the P1 Grand Prix. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX down his brow and onto the rocky ground beneath him. Come on Primip. Push. Sitting under a nearby tree while wiping the sweat away from their own training, Misty shook her head. Ash and Primip have been doing nothing but training like crazy for the last 3 days. Watching the black-haired boy and his Pokémon hop up and then jump and grab onto a large tree branch hanging above them so they could begin doing pull-ups, Giselle rubbed the top of her Marowak's head skull as he sat in her lap. Ash always does this before he participates in a big battle, why would this time be any different? Brock, who was wiping his own sweaty torso down while Zubat sat on his shoulder, watched Ash and Primip let go of the tree branch and then square off so they could begin sparring. Well, that in this type of tournament is something they've never done before. I think they really want to make sure they're prepared. That's part of the reason why Ash wins battles like he does. The two Rattata sisters, Raticate, Pikachu and Bee began subbing in for Ash to fight with Primip. Some more than one at a time, while the boy himself stood off to the side and helped coach his fighting type when he saw him doing anything that wasn't just right technique-wise. I think Primip looks strong and fit, more than ready to take on this competition. Giselle said confidently. I guarantee he's going to do great. She then looked at Brock. Are you still considering signing Graveler up for the tournament? The squinty-eyed teen nodded. Yeah, but not really to win. I'd like to get him some more battle experience after the training we've been doing, but since this is a fighting type tournament and no other moves that aren't physically based are allowed, I don't really foresee him getting all that far. But hey, who knows? That's right, Misty said with a smile. Do your best and who knows how far you two could go. They then turned their attention back to watching Ash and Primig train, but soon enough, it was time for them to hit the road again so they could make it to the town before nightfall. The journey itself only took about 2 extra hours, and when they finally arrived in the town that the P1 Grand Prix would be held within, all of them were a little surprised at how small it was. At least compared to some of the more recent towns and cities they had passed through. Making their way to the Pokémon Center that was located near the big recreational center in town that would be hosting the fighting tournament, Ash and his friends soon enough found themselves standing at Nurse Joy's desk while handing over their Pokémon for healing. Once they had turned all of them in and went over to sit in the waiting area of the center, Ash sat down and sighed to himself. It feels so good to sit on a nice chair for a change. He cracks his neck. But on the subject, this fighting tournament will be a really nice change of pace too. Yeah, usually it's just gym battles, Giselle agreed. This will be nice to break up the monotony. Speaking of which, tomorrow is the sign-ups. Brock looked at Ash. We have to make sure we're there before 8 in the morning to get ourselves signed in so we don't miss it. The younger boy nodded. Right. What I really want to do right now though is go upstairs to our room and go to bed. I'm exhausted. Misty yawned. Yeah, me too. We've been hitting it pretty hard lately. Get a good night's rest so tomorrow we're ready for all the excitement there's sure to be. Her first friend of the 3 she had made since leaving Cerulean City gave a grunt of agreement as he got up from the table and stretched. Alright then guys, let's turn in and then get our Pokémon tomorrow. The others were all in agreement and got up from the table as well. Leaving the lobby soon afterwards and heading upstairs for a good night of rest before the upcoming day of excitement that was sure to come. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX outside of the town's recreational center where a line had formed for the P1 Grand Prix sign-ups. As they waited on their turnout in the hot sun, Ash looked up at the building itself and hummed to himself. It looks more like an actual indoor arena than a rec center, at least from the outside. Misty sighed and fanned herself with her hand. I just hope they have air conditioning inside because I'm sweating my butt off out here. Pikachu. The yellow mouse on Ash's shoulder suddenly chirped and then pointed as they all turned their attention to see Anthony and his daughter, Rebecca, coming up to join them in the line. Hey! The big man greeted with a smile and a wave. Didn't expect to see you four here. You kids plannin' on entering the P1 Grand Prix too? Ash nodded. Yeah, me and Brock are. He then smiled. We decided to try it out after hearing you talk about it. Ha! Anthony laughed. That's the spirit, I like it. Well now don't you two go thinking I'll be taking it easy on ya if we end up facing one another in the tournament, you got it. He finished with a wink while throwing up a thumb. Oh daddy. Rebecca scolded lightly with an amused smile before turning her attention to them. I think it's great you two are entering, the more competition here for the tournament the better. Ash looked up at V and then Pikachu on either of his shoulders before glancing back at her again. Well, I was telling my friends last night that it'll be a good change of pace to try this instead of challenging gyms all the time. And if anything, it'll warm me up for the next one I'll be going to in a few days. The small group started chatting randomly after that about different things while waiting for their turn to get inside, but while they waited, none of them were aware of the hidden trio watching them from behind a dumpster near the large rec center. Only a short distance away. As they listened to what was being said amongst Ash, his friends and the father-daughter fighting duo, Jesse, James and Meowth lowered the special spy issue rocket binoculars from their eyes, which also allowed them to listen in on conversations using a built-in, wireless audio enhancement function, and looked at each other. Did you hear that? James asked as he blinked and raised a finger. Those twerps are planning on entering that big fighting tournament inside. Then we must enter as well. Jessie stated as she looked at her teammate. If we can enter the tournament, then we might be able to snatch a bunch of strong fighting types in the process. Yeah, but that's the problem. Meowth deadpanned. We ain't got no fightin' Pokemon to enter in that tournament. Ah, he's right. James hung his head low. We don't have any to enter. Well then. Jessie looked over at the main entrance doors to the building, where a tall man in a hat and trench coat was walking into it with a Hitmonlee at his side. We'll just have to procure our own prominent punchy Pokemon, won't we? The other two looked to where she was staring as James tilted his head. But Jessie. Hitmonlee doesn't punch. Exactly. Yes. Whatever. Not listening at all, she grabbed James and Meowth around the necks and sprung forward. Now let's go get us a champion. This is gonna end bad. Meowth said with thin eyes of knowing exasperation as she manhandled the two of them into action. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX building some time later and saw firsthand how large it was inside. There were dozens of rows of chairs set up all over the inside of the building, and in the center of it was a large, square-shaped boxing ring. I can't believe it, Rebecca. Anthony turned to his daughter and smiled excitedly. We're finally here. Before she could reply though, he took her hand and started pulling her towards the ring. Come on, let's get a closer look. Ash and his friends saw the red-haired girl smile back in amusement at them and then wave as her father pulled her away, leading Ash to look over at Brock. We should probably go find the locker room, Brock. Remember that lady outside said the first fights don't begin for another hour. Right. He nodded. Let's do it. Girls, Ash looked at Misty and Giselle. Since only competitors are allowed back there, you two okay waiting out here for us? They both nodded in agreement, leaving Ash and Brock to leave for the locker room while the ladies headed down ringside. Upon arriving, they saw Rebecca watching her father with a soft smile as Anthony, who was now in the ring, danced around like a professional fighter and shadow boxed against invisible opponents. Your dad really loves fighting, doesn't he? Misty asked with a smile as she and Giselle came to stand beside the redhead. Yeah, she nodded. My dad actually used to be a professional boxer and almost went pro until he met my mother and they got pregnant with me. Rebecca smiled sadly. After that, he gave up his dream as a fighter and went to work in a meat packing plant, providing for me, my mother and my future siblings. He never once ever complained. She then looked over at the two beside of her. After all my dad has done for us, helping him try to make Hitmonchan a P1 champion was the least I could do. I didn't understand it at first, but my mother helped me understand that sometimes, family has to make sacrifices to be there for each other. Giselle and Misty nodded in agreement and understanding while returning their attention to Anthony sparring an invisible opponent up in the ring. Meanwhile, back in the locker room, a disguised Jesse, James and Meowth, having snuck in from one of the back doors of the building, were watching their target walk out of the locker room and down the long tunnel hallway that lead from there, all the way back to the main fight venue. Seeing the tall, mostly concealed man walking their way with his Hitmonlee following beside him, Jessie shared a nod with her two fellow coat-covered rockets and gave the silent signal. Seeing no else coming down the hallway at the moment in either direction, they slowed their pace so they were standing nearest to a shadowy corner. Then, right as the trench coat-wearing man went to walk by them, all three rockets promptly pushed he and Hitmonlee into the corner. Come on, James. Hold him down. Tie his legs. Jesse demanded. I'm trying, Jesse, but I eek. James was suddenly sent flying back out of the dark corner and into the far wall, soon followed by both Meowth and Jesse. As they hit the wall and then landed next to James in a heap, Jesse and the talking Pokémon beside her looked up and saw the big, shrouded man coming out of the dark corner with his Hitmonlee in tow. Reaching up, the man pulled his hat and coat off to reveal a huge, bald, muscle-bound figure of a human being beneath. The man was only wearing a blue tank top and matching sweatpants with fighting shoes on his feet. Looking down at the three rockets that were now cowering before his size, the man cracked his knuckles and scowled at them. Hitmonlee, meanwhile, brushed some loose rope off its shoulders that they had tried to tie it up with and came to stand beside the bald man. You low-lives trying to steal my Hitmonlee from me. I'll make you pay for that. Hitmonlee crossed its arms and looked down at them while Jessie, James and Meowth all held their hands up and tried to plead for mercy. No. Please sir. Please. Why you have the wrong idea we. That was as far as they got as, seconds later, the hall was filled with the sounds of raining fists and brutal kicks before, eventually and with a well-placed mega kick, Jessie and the other two were sent hurtling through the ceiling high above. As they took yet another trip through the sky, now covered in bruises and welts, Meowth sighed and gave Jessie the stink eye. I told ya it was a bad idea ya nimrods. Oh shut up. Jessie snapped back. It was James's fault for not tying them up right. Me. James shouted back. I was the one who got clobbered in the face first with a kick to the nose. As his two human partners argued amongst themselves, Meowth crossed his arms and sighed again just before they disappeared into the atmosphere. I really need to get new teammates. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX center cheered loudly as the gray-haired, black-suited announcer's loud declaration through the microphone. The first fights will be starting soon, Giselle said as she, Misty and Rebecca sat in the ringside seats they had taken for themselves. I wonder if Ash, Brock or Anthony will be up first. It's hard to say, the redhead answered. There were a lot of competitors here today, so any of them could be up first. As the announcer read out the name of the first two trainers and their Pokémon who would be fighting first, which wasn't either of the three they were hoping to see, Misty sat back and sighed. This is probably going to take a while. Meanwhile, down in the locker room, Ash, Brock and Anthony were in the middle of warming up with their respective Pokémon. Something that most of the contestants were all doing in their own parts of the large locker area. While Anthony worked Hitmonchan on some Shadow Mitts and Brock had Graveler doing quick feats, Ash and Primip were alternating between jumping Shadow Rope and lightly sparring together. Seeing the first fight come up on the TV suspended above the locker room door, which was between a Hitmontop and a Tyrogue, everyone kept at least one eye on the fight to help keep themselves revved up and ready to go on for their own fights. That Tyrogue is pretty quick, Brock commented as he walked up to stand next to Anthony, who had stopped working Hitmonchan to watch. Yeah, and Hitmontop has got some pretty brutal kicks, Ash joined in while he and Primip watched from near one of the long benches. Yeah, but Tyrogue has a weak spot, Anthony observed. See the way it pivots to its right side every time it throws a right cross jab. That shows a prior injury, probably in the ankle from the way it's moving. Wow, you know a lot about fights. Ash said in an impressed tone, which made Anthony look back at him and smile. That's because I used to be a professional fighter myself. Really? Ash and Brock replied together in shock. Yeah, he nodded. I was gonna go big time, but then I met Rebecca's mother, fell in love, and then, life happened. That's why I'm here with Hitmonchan. He placed a hand on his Pokemon's shoulder. So at least one of us can become a champ. Ash and Brock both shared a look and a smile before nodding. That's a really great goal, Anthony. The former complimented, followed by Brock looking down at Graveler and laughing. You and me might need a better reason to be in this thing and win if we want to have a hope in standing a chance against people like Anthony. Grav. The big rock type called back while flexing its four hands into fists and nodding confidently. After several minutes passed and 3 rounds of 10 went by, the preparing contestants saw Tyrogue knock Hitmontop out with a hard uppercut after high jump evading a low spin kick from the other Pokémon. After that, several more first fights passed by. Some centering around reasonably skilled opponents, some that were absolutely one-sided and others still that were nothing short of embarrassingly amateurish. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the TV in the locker room showed the image of Ash on it with the picture of another man dressed in a karate gi across from him. Alright Ash, good luck. Brock wished his friend with a pat to his back. Yeah, and whatever happens always remember. Anthony held his arms up and smiled. Keep your guard up. The boy smiled at both of them and nodded gratefully before looking at Primip and nodding. You ready, pal? Primip. He raised his fists in the air and beat on his chest. Alright, let's go. Ash looked at Pikachu and V on the bench. Come on guys, we've got a fight to get to. With his smaller Pokémon soon taking their places on each of his shoulders, Ash walked out of the locker room with Primip and down the long tunnel that lead to the fighting ring. Before they finally stepped into the open and out of the tunnel a short time later, the two of them stopped and waited as the announcer in the ring read out the cue cards he held in his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This first opponent comes all the way from Goldenrod City in the Johto region. He has competed with his Pokémon in several fighting competitions and their record in the circuit stands at 15 wins, with 5 losses. Please give a big welcome to the karate-kicking expert and his powerhouse of a Pokémon. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan and Machamp. The lights in the building focused on the other tunnel on the far side of the arena where a brown-haired man in a karate gi with a huge, muscular Machamp was coming out towards the ring. Neither of them making any overt, unnecessary fanfare. As they entered the ring to the crowd's cheers, Ash breathed slowly to calm his nerves and then smiled down at Primip as the announcer called out again. This next fighter is competing in his first ever ring fighting tournament of any kind. He is a young man who comes from a small place known as Pallet Town, right here in our very own backyard region. This young man is an official Pokémon trainer competing in the Indigo League gym circuit and he's probably the youngest contestant we have ever had. Please put your hands together for new contenders. Ash and Primeape. The crowd cheered again, giving Ash and Primip their cue to run out of the tunnel and start making their way down the long path to the fighting ring. As the lights of the house shone upon their faces and people gathered on either side of the pathway to the ring cheered and waved them on, Ash and Primip stayed focused and kept a steady jog going all the way to the ring. As soon as they had arrived and stepped up onto the platform, Ash stopped and hugged Primip tightly before he could step into the ring. I love you, Primip. I know you're going to do a great job and make me proud. The sensitive fighting type looked at Ash with teary eyes for a minute before snapping back into focus and nodding. Prime. Afterwards, Ash held the ropes open for his Pokémon and allowed him to slip in first before he followed suit. As they made their way to the center of the ring to square off with their opponents, the announcer walked in circles while speaking through his microphone again. This fight will be 10 5-minute rounds. The winner will be decided either by full knockout, TKO or scorecard by our 3 judges. He pointed to the side of the ring where the lights shone on 3 judges sitting at a table where the bell was at. There will be no substitutions, no use of illegal supplements or weapons in this fight and there will be no interference by a trainer in the ring. If a trainer steps foot in the ring before the bell sounds then it will be considered an automatic disqualification. The announcer then gestured to a white and black striped shirted man stepping into the ring and walking over. I now introduce to you referee Paulie Piñata. As the middle-aged, overweight and slightly balding gray-haired man walked up to Ash and Dan, he coughed into his hand and then spoke in a gruff voice that had to have belonged to a cigarette or cigar smoker. Alright, you two, listen up. This is gonna be a fair fight. No biting, no special energy-based moves and no items that can be used as weapons. And no healing items can be used at any point in the match, got it? Ash and the other man nodded before Paulie looked down and saw the black belt wrapped around Primeape's waist. Hey! He pointed. That do anything special? Ash shook his head. No sir, it's just a trophy to commemorate an earlier victory. The ill-tempered older man just nodded his head from side to side before shaking his hands. Whatever then, I don't care. Now you listen for the bell and when it goes off, you head to your corner. And if at any point I stop the match, you better darn well stop fighting, got it? They nodded again as the referee backed away after saying, now shake hands and get into your corners. Stepping forward, Ash shook the grown man's hand while looking up at him and smiling. Good luck, sir. The GI-wearing man nodded back. You too, kid, good luck. Primip and Machamp stared each other down before hitting fists together, for Machamp more than once, and then going back to their corners. As Ash slipped under the ropes and got into position outside of the ring to coach Primip, the furry fighting type bounced in place while keeping his shoulders loose. Alright Primip, you got this bud. Fight safe and fight smart. Remember what me and our teachers back at Professor Oaks taught the both of us and you'll be good. Prime. The energized fighting type slammed his fists together and nodded. Pika Pi Pikachu. Pikachu cheered him on from beside Ash up on the very corner of the ring. B. The multi-evolution based little Pokémon chirped as well from beside of Pikachu. Come on Primeape, you can do it. Yeah Primeape, fight hard. Ash and Primeape, you can win. They all looked back and saw Misty, Giselle and Rebecca cheering them on from their ringside seats and took a moment to wave before focusing on the fight at hand again. Finally, with Primeape and Machamp looking focused in their corners, the bell rung and they stepped out, ready to go. Machamp, for its part, circled Primeape slowly while the pig-monkey Pokémon did the same thing, each one sizing the other up before attacking. Finally, Machamp stepped forward and delivered several lightning-fast jabs at Primeape, making the smaller Pokémon hold his guards up and jump lightly on his feet to avoid the blows. However, Machamp kept pressing forward and used its size to the advantage. This was done by the muscular fighter throwing several quick jabs and cross hooks at Primeape, making good use of all four of its arms with every blow. Primeape, obviously being far lighter on his feet, was able to hop around the ring and avoid the blows while occasionally needing to throw up his guards to block a wayward punch. Unfortunately, Machamp's much large size made it a daunting task for Primeape to attempt to get in and deliver any kind of punches or attacks of his own. Not only that, but since Machamp kept pressing forward in a straight-ahead advantage while using the long reach of its arms to continuously throw several fast punches from one of its four arms, Primeape simply wasn't presented any kind of opening. Come on Primeape, focus. Ash yelled. Take your time and be patient, only take a hit when you get an open target. At that point, Dan yelled out. Now Machamp, speed it up. With those words, Machamp started moving his feet faster towards Primeape while the punches came even quicker. Once more, Primeape was forced to dance around the ring to avoid them, but this time, his opponent showed that it had its own impressive footwork abilities. For every step in every direction that Primeape would take, Machamp would quickly step that way too and follow it up by throwing several rapid, fast punches, over and over again. This tactic seriously limited down on Primeape's ability to freely move around the ring, and that proved to be very bad indeed. Eventually, pressing ahead in a strong dart forward, Machamp broke Primeape's momentum entirely and started throwing dozens of rapid punches at the smaller Pokémon. With nowhere to go, Primeape held his guards up tightly to his face and tried to weather the storm and block everything he could, but, eventually, he began eating some of them. Machamp worked its fists in patterns. Up and down, side to side and straight ahead at Primeape's body. When he would try to slip to the left or turn around, Machamp would sting his side or gut with a hard punch. Seeing his Pokémon getting backed into the corner of the ring as he tried desperately to defend himself, Ash watched Primeape begin to get brutally pummeled by Machamp's four fists as his guard gradually broke. Primeape, keep your guards up and try to slip out of there. Ash yelled, but Primeape could simply not get away. The punishment rained down for what seemed like forever until, thankfully, the bell rung. As Machamp hurried back to its corner, Primeape limped over to his and then sat down on a stool that Ash placed under him while his trainer got in the ring with him. Okay Primeape, listen, Machamp is a lot bigger than you and has a much longer reach. It's using that to box you in and then just rain down abuse on you once you're back in the corner. You can't let that happen or you're just going to get pulverized, alright? You're smaller, more agile and quicker. Use that to your advantage and outmaneuver it. Primeape nodded and then opened his one squinted eye before grunting his name and then running back out into the ring once the bell rung a few seconds later. Immediately, Machamp went barreling in towards Primeape with fists flying, much faster than at the start of the first round. Getting backed into the corner quite quickly again, Primeape put his guards up and had to once more begin fending off an onslaught, but Ash yelled loud enough for him to hear. Primeape, get away. Remember. You're faster. You're more agile. Machamp, finish it. Dan commanded loudly. Do it. Just as Machamp stepped back and then prepared to step forward and throw another fierce punch into Primeape's gut, the fur-covered fighting type opened his eyes and narrowed them before tensing his leg muscles up and then jumping. Machamp's punch ended up slamming right into the corner post of the ring as Primeape jumped over its head. Then, with a glowing foot, Primeape smashed it down into the back of Machamp's head hard enough to bend it forward like a hinge. Not stopping there though, Primip then used low kick to follow up the mega kick and swept Machamp's legs out from under it from behind. As it went airborne and then slammed into the ground, Machamp gasped in pain while Primip hopped back and bounced on his feet. "Yeah, Primip!" Ash cheered. "Just like that. Get up, Machamp!" Dan yelled. "Get up and fight!" Getting to its feet, the four-armed Pokémon grunted angrily and then rushed Primip while punching quickly again. Ash's Pokémon was ready for it this time though, and instead of running away, Primip just jumped into the air, using one of Machamp's arms as a springboard. Landing behind Machamp, Primip surged forward and started throwing dozens of fast, rapid jabs into the other Pokémon's back and sides. Machamp turned around with a wincing grimace and swiped at Primip again, use a dynamic punch, but the other, more agile fighting type slipped around under it and then pounded the inside of Machamp's right thigh with 4 bruising whip kicks. Stumbling back a pace or two with a noticeable limp, Machamp was put on its heels as Primip rushed in and started wailing its hard stomach with mega punch after mega punch. Eyes popping out and spittle flying from its mouth on every punch, Machamp stumbled back a few more paces while Primip followed it and kept hammering its torso with punch after punch. "No, Machamp. No. Get out of there. Get away. Fight back," Dan ordered desperately. But Primip now had Machamp's number and he was making the other Pokémon pay for it. Machamp had great power and good footwork, but its agility and dexterity left a definite something to be desired. Moving all around its sides and jumping over his opponent's head like the primate he was, Primip continued moving in and then retreating back quickly while delivering punishing blows to Machamp's hard body. Finally, with one well-placed mega punch to the gut and a sky uppercut to the jaw, Primip sent Machamp flying high into the air and then back to the ground with a harsh thud. Right as the bell rang and signaled the end of round 2. However, Machamp was now laying out cold on the mat, eyes unfocused and arms splayed out to the sides limply. Running out, the referee held Primip's arm up while the announcer shouted, "And that is it. At the ring of the bell, Machamp is down for the count. Primip is the winner." "Yes." Ash cheered as he jumped into the ring with Pikachu and Bian ran over to embrace Primip. "You did it, buddy. You won. I'm so proud of you. Prime. Primip." The pig-monkey Pokémon responded happily back to Ash while the crowd cheered. A despondent Dan also ran out to his fallen Pokémon and Misty, Giselle and Rebecca all cheered for Primip. A few minutes later, after exiting the ring and heading back down into the locker room with Primip in tow, Ash was confronted by Brock and Anthony immediately upon arrival. "Great job, Ash." Brock complimented. "Primip did awesome in that fight. I'll say." Anthony nodded. "You managed to help Primip find that Machamp's weakness and then used your Pokémon's own strengths to overcome your opponent's weaknesses. Now that's a fighter." Ash smiled proudly at Primip and patted his Pokémon's shoulder while a Nurse Joy, the local town one apparently, hurried up to them with a Chansey in tow and smiled. "Hello. I don't mean to interrupt, but it's mine and Chansey's job to look after and patch up each Pokémon after a fight, so if you don't mind, I'll look at Primip for you." Ash nodded. "Yes please, Nurse Joy." She then had Primip sit down on the bench and looked him over before looking at Chansey and asking, "Chansey, please use Heal Pulse on Primip." "Chansey. The sweet-natured Pokémon began chanting as she held her hands out in front of Primip and began channeling healing green energy into the fighting type, soon effectively healing him of the damage he had sustained in the fight. Ash smiled thankfully at Nurse Joy as Chansey finished and bowed his head. "Thank you, Nurse Joy, and you as well, Chansey." Joy then walked over to a small cart she had rolled into the locker room and took 3 sets of towels and water bottles which she handed to Brock, Ash and Anthony. Or at least, Anthony took the water but not the towels since he already carried a red one around with him on his shoulder. "Here. I've been giving these out to all the contestants in the tournament." Joy informed while giving a starry-eyed Brock his and then stepped back and smiled sweetly at all of them. "You can't dehydrate and everyone likes to wipe the sweat away." They all thanked her for her kindness before Ash tapped Brock's shoulder and pointed up at the TV. As he turned and looked, Brock saw his name and picture now lit up on the screen next to the picture of a bearded man named Ted. "Okay, looks like it's time." He looked at Graveler. "You ready?" The rock type nodded and then Ash placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. You got this, Brock. The former pewter gym leader smiled and nodded while Anthony gave him a thumbs up for good luck. Afterwards, he left the locker room with Graveler to get to the ring. XXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXXX. And now our next contestant, ladies and gentlemen. The announcer spoke through his mic a short time after announcing Brock's opponent, a big bearded man named Ted who worked as a lumberjack and was entering the P1 for the first time with his powerful-looking Aggron. He is new as well to the P1 Grand Prix fighting circuit and used to be one of our very own gym leaders, right here in Kanto from Pewter City. Ladies and gentlemen, I give to you Brock Stone and his Graveler RRRRRR. The crowd cheered wildly while Brock and Graveler ran out to the ring. Though, as they made their way there, Giselle leaned over and whispered to Misty. Hey, why didn't Ash give his last name when he was up? Probably because of the whole Team Rocket thing, I don't know. The announcer did say he was from Pallet Town though. Misty shrugged. He was probably just being extra cautious. The orange-haired girl then looked over at Rebecca and asked. Hey Rebecca, I've noticed something. Why didn't they weigh in the contestants before the fights and then announce the weights, reaches, height and stuff of the Pokémon before every fight like they do in human fighting? Well, that's because Pokémon ring fighting is so different from what people do, Rebecca explained. In human fighting, people only have so much strength and they don't possess special abilities. Pokémon on the other hand can't be judged by their size or weight to know who they might be best to pair up with in a fight class. Not to mention, some Pokémon have special traits that can help them overcome something like a height or weight difference. It just wouldn't make sense. Misty and Giselle both nodded in understanding as Brock got in the ring with Graveler and then went to square off with their opponent. After the announcer and temperamental referee finished doing their thing, the fighters went to their corners and didn't come out again until the bell rung. You got this, Graveler. Brock cheered once it did ring. Seconds later and the rock type went into action. Unfortunately for the two of them, they had no idea just how aggressive their opponent really was. Aggron. The powerful and huge steel type took off in a rampant charge at Graveler, closing the distance of the small ring in a matter of seconds and grabbing hold of the rock type. Lifting it high, Aggron roared and then tossed Graveler into the ropes, cocking a fist back as Brock's Pokémon was catapulted back toward it thanks to the flexible ring boundary. Smashing said fist into Graveler's face, which sent him falling back into the far opposite corner with a cry of pain, Aggron converged on its opponent once again and, for a second time, picked Graveler up. Rearing back, Aggron smashed the rock Pokémon into the ring and then dropped a nasty elbow down onto the smaller fighter with enough force to make Graveler cry out in pain. Standing up again, Aggron kicked Graveler toward the ropes on the far side of the ring and as soon as he hit them and came rolling back, stunned, the foul-tempered Pokémon smashed yet another fist into Graveler's hard, rocky body. Brock watched in desperation as his Pokémon was turned into a pinball and got continuously clobbered all around the ring. Each time hitting the ropes only to rebound back into one of Aggron's fists. Having lost total control of the fight at that point, Brock was at a loss for words and that hopelessness lasted the whole fight until, finally, as the first round mercifully came to a close, he was jumping into the ring to tend to his badly battered Pokémon. Graveler. Are you okay? Looking at his trainer through a squinted eye, Graveler panted. Grav. Look. Brock glanced back at Aggron, who was being confidently tended to by its own trainer. That Pokémon is insanely strong, way more than you are. You have to use speed and hit where Aggron isn't expecting it, okay. Graveler nodded and then slowly stood back up just as the bell rung, signaling the start of the second round. Which was signaled by a scantily dressed young woman walking around the ring holding up a ring card, whom Brock desperately avoided looking at for the sake of his Pokémon. Hearing Misty, Giselle and Rebecca cheering Graveler on from their seats, Brock hopped out of the ring and silently prayed for the best. Like at the start of the first round, Aggron roared and charged Graveler again, but this time, Brock was quick to act and was sweating while he did so. Graveler used rollout to get away now. The rock type quickly tucked in and took off rolling across the ring to avoid the steel type's charge. Turning around, Aggron charged at Graveler again while roaring angrily. However, Brock's Pokémon kept rolling away and made a wide, curving arc to avoid his opponent's lunging grab. Come on Aggron, catch that big pebble already and slam it. The Hoenn Pokémon's trainer shouted. Aggron kept running after Graveler and attempted to catch him, but Brock's Pokémon had become far too fast by that point. On and on Graveler rolled around the ring while avoiding Aggron's constant attempts to grab, charge down and stomp on him. Eventually, Graveler spun around and zoomed towards Aggron, and then, just before reaching it, the rock type launched itself up off the ring mat and up into the air above the steel type's head. Aggron looked up, but just as it did so, Graveler unfurled itself and slammed a powerful fist straight down into his opponent's face. Aggron growled in pain and stumbled as Graveler landed back on the ground, immediately tucking into a roll again and then slamming himself straight up into the larger Pokémon's gut. Aggron stumbled back several paces but quickly righted itself as it roared and then charged at Graveler again. Graveler, wait for it! Brock yelled as Aggron got closer. Wait for it! It kept getting nearer and nearer, leading the team to start sweating anxiously. Wait! Wait! Then, just as Aggron was upon Graveler, Brock yelled. Now! Roll between its legs! Tucking up into a tight ball again, Graveler used rollout to roll quickly underneath of Aggron's legs and then spun around while the big Pokémon was standing confused. Hearing Brock command him to slam himself into Aggron from behind, he did so. Without breaking speed, Graveler jumped and smashed his rocky body into the steel type's back with enough force to send it stumbling forward. Then, rolling around to the side, Graveler once more slammed himself into Aggron from the side, this time sending his opponent stumbling to the right. Graveler simply repeated this pattern over and again, rolling around quickly to each side of Aggron's body and then slamming himself into it from several different angles. Finally, as Aggron stumbled backwaters after taking several heavy hits to the body, Graveler rolled himself into the ropes of the ring and then slung himself straight at the steel type and directly into its face. Groaning and roaring, simultaneously, in pain, Aggron was actually lifted from its feet and flew back across the ring before landing heavily near the ropes and going still. The referee quickly came out and got to the ground and began tapping his hand to the mat as he counted aloud. Once he managed to get to 10 though, it was all over and the bell rung, making the crowd erupted into cheers as he went over to grab one of Graveler's arms and announce him the winner. Brock shouted in joy and ran out to embrace his Pokémon while Misty, Giselle and Rebecca cheered and clapped from their seats. Standing up afterwards, Brock held Graveler's right upper arm into the air and allowed his Pokémon to bask in the crowd's cheers while he, himself, laughed happily and pumped his fist into the air. All this happened while Aggron's trainer despondently returned his Pokémon and then walked quietly out of the ring. Once they returned to the locker room a short time later, Brock was greeted by an ecstatic-looking Ash. Man, that was so awesome, Brock. You and Graveler were an incredible team together. Yeah, Brock, not too shabby. Anthony praised. You both fought hard, you should be proud of yourselves. Brock smiled modestly, much like Ash had earlier. Thanks, but that was a hard fight and I expect it to only get harder with each passing round. Before they could talk anymore, Anthony's picture and name suddenly appeared on the TV screen above the door, right beside one of a red-haired man wearing a red shirt. Hey now. Looks like we're up Hitmonchan. The muscular former fighter turned and smiled at his fighting type. You ready, old friend? Mon. He called back with a head nod while Ash and Brock both wished the two of them well. You got this, Anthony, stay focused. Yeah, go out and show them what you're made of. Anthony took a deep breath and just flashed a thumbs up before walking out of the locker room with Hitmonchan in tow. In what seemed like only the blink of an eye, but was really almost 10 minutes later, Anthony and Hitmonchan were standing in the ring facing down their opponents across from them. And what an opponent it was too, since Anthony's red-headed foe was battling with a big, tough-looking Hariyama. Having waited to introduce the fighters until they actually got into the ring this time, most likely to save on time, the announcer finished introducing the red-haired man, named Chuck, and then pointed at Anthony. And in this corner, coming all the way from Saffron City, I give you a man who once almost went pro in the Kanto professional boxers circuit and has years of fighting experience under his belt. Please give it up for boxing veteran Anthony Balzoa and his Hitmonchan. Trainer and Pokémon both turned and stuck their fists up to the cheering crowd while Rebecca stood up and yelled, "Yeah, Dad. Come on, you two can do it." Hearing his daughter, Anthony gave her a wave and a big smile before going out to the center of the ring with Hitmonchan to have the rules of the fight explained to them. Within the span of barely a minute though, the two trainers were standing back outside of the ring as their Pokémon stared each other down while standing in their opposite sides of the ring. As the bell rung, Hariyama took everyone by surprise at the sheer speed it showed. Charging Hitmonchan while rapidly beating its hands out in front of it like karate chops, Hariyama lunged forward and then slammed its palms down into the ring, right where Hitmonchan had been standing. Showing impressive speed however, the boxing Pokémon jumped to the left with a strong spring off his legs to avoid the incoming attack. Then, lunging forward, Hitmonchan delivered a series of fast jabs into Hariyama's side. Amazingly enough though, the larger Pokémon just turned and looked down at the smaller fighting type before smirking and then slamming its right hand into Hitmonchan's face. The blow was hard enough that it sent him skidding back a few feet, but Anthony was yelling up to him at the same time. "That's alright Hitmonchan, come on. Just shake that one off, shake it off." Doing as told, the punchy Pokémon slammed his gloved hands together and then slowly began circling Hariyama. Hariyama crushed that little bug into the ground. Its trainer yelled, "Come on, do it." Hariyama rushed Hitmonchan once more and began delivering multiple rapid punches at its opponent without giving an inch. Luckily, Hitmonchan was fast on his feet and was able to continuously dodge, duck and weave under every heavy blow to avoid having his bell rung badly. Obviously well trained in the art of boxing, Hitmonchan kept dodging and weaving under and around each punch, every blow, while occasionally snapping a hard punch into the bigger Pokémon's side and gut as a counter. At the same time, Hariyama would occasionally catch Hitmonchan off guard and throw a hard open palm strike into the other fighting type's gut, sides or face. However, Hitmonchan was not only well trained but also hardy, and even after receiving a few hard blows, he would simply shake himself off and then jump back into the fight. This was a trend that both Pokémon followed for the next 3 consecutive rounds. Each one trading blows occasionally, tit for tat, all while trying to get the better of the other. Eventually though, right in the middle of the 4th round, Hariyama's trainer suddenly changed the fight altogether by yelling, "Hariyama! Sweep the legs! Sweep!" Showing amazing agility and dexterity for such a large Pokémon, Hariyama suddenly dropped down and swept one of its legs out and around in a fast circle. This caught Hitmonchan by surprise and caused Anthony's Pokémon to get knocked off his feet as he began falling backwards. At the same time, Hariyama stepped forward and bent down, taking advantage of the situation by grabbing Hitmonchan in a tight hold and then standing up. With the punchy Pokémon held tightly in its grasp, Hariyama then flexed its muscles before beginning to squeeze Hitmonchan as tightly as it could. The strategy obviously being to choke the smaller Pokémon out by suffocating him completely. The crowd was on edge and watching in rapt attention as Hariyama squeezed Hitmonchan tightly, whom was beginning to gasp and groan in pain as he felt the intense pressure bearing down on him. Misty, Giselle and Rebecca all looked extremely worried and began to cheer in support for Hitmonchan, but Anthony, feeling desperate as he watched his Pokémon struggle, finally had a shot of inspiration as he blinked once, twice, before snapping into action. "Hey Hitmonchan! Use a backwards headbutt." The struggling Pokémon cracked an eye open and, fighting to do as his trainer commanded, mustered up his energy and focus before leaning his head forward, then snapping it back hard. The force of the head snap was great enough that when it impacted with Hariyama's face, the larger Pokémon loosened its grip on Hitmonchan while stumbling back. Landing down on his feet and gasping for air, Hitmonchan jumped 2 paces away and turned around to look at the now dazed Hoenn Pokémon. "Hitmonchan!" Anthony yelled. "Follow through. Follow it up. Go!" Eyes narrowing intently, Hitmonchan nodded and then jumped forward, right into Hariyama's center with guards firmly up. Then, like a jackhammer slamming its way into the ground, Hitmonchan began throwing multiple hard, fast and accurate punch combinations straight into the larger Pokémon's gut and sides. The already stunned Hariyama was unable to defend itself, and this led to it eating each and every hard blow until, soon enough, the pain had it beginning to bend over. Seeing the time was right as Hariyama started to stoop, Anthony called out. Now Hitmonchan. Use Sky Uppercut. Right from where he was, Hitmonchan shifted his weight down onto his back heel, turned his body and then rocketed himself up while bringing his right hand up in a fast, powerful uppercut. Catching Hariyama under the chin and lifting it off of its feet by extension, Hitmonchan followed through completely. Even as his opponent actually went up into the air, across the ring a few feet and then landed, with a loud thud, straight on the mat. The referee hurried after seeing Hariyama not moving to get back up and then got onto the ground before beginning to count. Hitmonchan stood ready while Anthony and the three girls spectating watched anxiously as the ref counted. Though, at long last, when 10 finally arrived and Hariyama still didn't move to get up, the referee ran over and lifted up Hitmonchan's fist as the announcer declared him the winner and the entire place erupted into applause. Running out to embrace his Pokémon and congratulate him, Anthony then turned and waved to the crowd with Hitmonchan while the community center continued to cheer and applaud. Although, none were nearly as loud, nor as proud, as Rebecca, who stood cheering and clapping loudest of all for her father. A short few minutes later, Anthony and Hitmonchan were walking back into the locker room where Ash and Brock were immediately upon them and congratulating the pair on their victory. While Hitmonchan began getting looked over and healed up by Nurse Joyce Chansey, Ash and the other two men sat and talked about Anthony's recent fight while a few others fighters were called out to the ring, one after the other. Before any of them knew it though, Ash's picture appeared up on the TV screen again, this time next to the picture of a young man with green hair. Yo Ash, I think you and Primip are up again. Anthony pointed. Standing up, the boy looked over at his Pokémon, who was stretching and already preparing himself, and smiled. You ready for another fight Primip? Prime. Primip ape. He replied back while shoving his fists into the air and nodding. After getting wished luck by Anthony and Brock, Ash and Primip made their way out of the locker room and back to the ring again. Unlike the first time, which was a new experience for both of them, they found themselves standing in the ring, opposite their opponents, and ready to fight in much less time than it took before. However, as soon as they saw who Primip would be fighting, both of them had their eyes slightly widening in surprise. Wow, that's a twist of fate. Ash began quietly. Another Primip. Sure enough, Primeape's opponent was none other than another Primip. Unlike Ash's though, the Primip they were staring down looked far less controlled and calm than the one wearing the black belt from the Saffron Fighting Dojo. The new Primip was beating its fists together and slamming them into the mat. Jumping into the air and waving its arms around while bellowing in what could only be obvious anger and fury. Not only that, but the other Primeape's fur didn't look well kept and its eyes showed nothing but rage. Knowing what a Primip could become if its temper wasn't properly toned down and controlled, Ash narrowed his eyes and thought to himself. This Primip isn't very well trained. It has no control over its temper obviously, so that means its form will be really bad. On the flip side though, it also means that its hits will be a lot harder and more explosive. Like a raging Tauros. Primip, he spoke to his own pig monkey Pokémon, whom appeared the picture of Serenity next to his volatile kin. Your cousin over there. I don't think it has any control over its temper. As long as you stay in control of yours and fight smart, you've got this. Okay. Primip just nodded in understanding as the bell rang and both identical Pokémon went to work circling each other. Just as Ash said, within the span of seconds, the other Primip was rushing his while waving its arms in the air and bellowing its name. Ash's Primip crouched into a ready stance and then, only needing to move a very short few inches to the side, he did a push block with his hands that knocked the other Primip off balance and almost sent it to its knees. Getting back up and grunting angrily, the temperamental pig monkey rushed Primip again and started throwing dozens of wild, uncontrolled punches at him without any form or control whatsoever. To make matters worse, its trainer was even egging it on from outside the ring. All but demanding more anger and rage with seemingly no thoughts of the consequences. Ash, for his part, only shook his head sadly at the other trainer's lack of knowledge while his own Primeape continued to easily and gracefully evade each attack sent his way. As the fight progressed and the first round gave way to the second, still, the fight remained much the same. The other Primeape had, by that point, used a flurry of different fighting-type moves, all while expending every drop of energy it had into fueling its blows with tremendous anger and fury. Ash's Primeape, on the other hand, appeared to be nearly gliding across the mat of the ring, not even breaking a sweat or looking tired. As opposed to his rage-filled opponent and kin, who looked as though it would break a blood vessel at any point if it grew any angrier. Finally, coming into the third round of uncontrolled kicks, wild punches and bellows of sheer rage, Ash saw what he had been hoping for when, due to the mounting frustration of being unable to hit Primeape, the other one stopped and shook with cold fury. At that moment, as its eyes turned red and its fur stood up on end, Ash knew that their opponent had activated the ability Anger Point. Becoming focused, Ash yelled, "Primeape, it's going into Anger Point. Stay sharp and be light on your feet, I'll give you my signal when it's time." Primeape nodded and then turned his full attention to his emotionally charged brethren as the other Primeape shouted as loudly as possible and then rushed him while using a rapid combination of several different fighting-type attacks. The crowd looked to be anxious and excited as they watched Ash's Primeape get forced to move, dodge and avoid the flurry of attacks at an almost frantic pace. However, unknown to any of them, Primeape was simply doing exactly as Ash wanted because the more his opponent attacked without control, the more exhausted it got. Even under the influence of Anger Point. Finally, after jumping back to avoid a sloppy mega kick, Primeape jumped up on top of one of the ring posts and then flipped up and over his opponent's head. Then, as soon as he landed and before his fighting-type kin could follow his movement, Primeape saw Ash nod and then went on the offensive. Stepping inside quickly with grace and precision that only strict training could create, Primeape began hammering his opponent with blow after blow. A deadly combination of body blows, chain kicks to the legs, kidney shots and stinging face punches. Its focus clouded by rage.